Well, Angelina, Peter, and Denis, really nice to see you. I trust you're all keeping well.
Yes, thank you.
So you're all partners in KPMG in Australia's tax and legal practice. And I know there's just been a lot going on in terms of the recent Australian federal budget. But I wanted to ask a question around the funding of the ATO. So I understand the ATO is being very well funded in its scrutiny of multinational groups. But what's changed recently in terms of funding?
Sure, thank you. So I think we've been lucky enough in Australia this year, in 2022, to have two budgets. In the first budget that was handed down on the 29th of March this year, the government announced that there would be an additional funding of around $652 million to extend what we call the Tax Avoidance Task Force through to 2025. And then earlier this year, in the most recent budget in October, the government announced further circa $200 million in funding per year for the next 3 years to extend the task force. And in 25-26, there's a significant further increase of another $354 million for that year. The task force funding budget essentially outlines the boosting and extension of the task force, and that is to support the ATO to pursue priority areas of approved business tax risks. The ATO is regularly publishing its views in respect of the perceived tax gap, and the additional boosted funding is expected to increase receipts by $2.8 billion and increase tax payments from multinationals by $1.1 billion over the next 4 years. This in turn will assist the ATO to further reduce its tax gap. So what does all of this mean for multinationals? Well, essentially it means that the ATO has a great deal of funding from the government to be able to increase its compliance activity. And this includes the significant number of justified trust reviews and audits that are being conducted at the moment. And for multinationals, I think what it means is that there's no doubt that all taxpayers, including multinationals, will be continued to be scrutinised by the ATO. There'll be combined assurance reviews, CARs, there'll be next actions reviews, which are known as NARs, and audits. And the key message for our taxpayers and for our clients is that they ought to be well prepared for this ongoing and very targeted ATO review and audit activity with a focus on multinationals. Certainly in my experience in assisting many multinationals who are going through these intense justified trust reviews and audits, it's very clear that the earlier they're prepared with the facts and evidence to support the position they've adopted, the better the experience and the more likely they are to get a better outcome from the process.
That's really interesting, Angelina. I got to believe with that sort of funding and that sort of expectation of revenue raising, there's just going to be a lot of exam activity. So what are you talking to clients about? Is it more in that realm of this is coming your way, get prepared, or what is it you talk to folk about?
Yeah, look, my key motto for all my clients is it's not a matter of if, but it's when the ATO comes knocking. They are conducting regular reviews at the moment. Every taxpayer in the top 1,000, which is probably sort of the top 1,800, are being looked at. And if they're not within that top 1,000 CARB program, there are also specific risk reviews on foot for certain taxpayers that fall within certain buckets. So we're often talking to our clients, the earlier the better. When you're doing a deal, when you're taking a tax position, make sure you're speaking to us about whether you're ATO ready and how will the ATO scrutinise and perceive the transaction that you're adopting. And most importantly, do you have the facts and evidence to support the position you're adopting? Because it's very clear that assertions just won't cut it with the ATO anymore.
Got it. Well, that's
when I talk to tax directors and foreign multinationals, particularly US headquarter groups, often they are surprised or comment on the degree of intensity the tax office has in its reviews, the amount of questions, the amount of focus relative to other revenue authorities. And it's a result of the funding for these type of programs. They've got the resources, they've got the programs in place, and will continue, this as Angelina's just said. So, to really be ready for more of the same and expect it's essentially the new norm, because although these are programs that are being extended. They've been going for an awfully long while now, and is really the normal paradigm here in Australia.
So not if, but when.
Yeah, that's right. Not if, but when. And absolutely right. Agree with Peter. I mean, the ATO is certainly at the forefront of being known as the most aggressive revenue authority across the globe, asking multinationals for quite a bit of information in, very early combined assurance reviews.
Interesting. Now, one of the other things that often people aren't familiar with is FIRB and what that means for inbound investors. So can you talk to me a little bit about what that is and what investors should expect from a tax perspective relative to investment proposals?
Sure. So Australia's foreign investment rules require that various inbound investments into Australia be reviewed and approved by the Foreign Investment Review Board, so they're FIRB. And that approval must be reviewed and approved prior to the investment being made in Australia. As part of the FIRB approval process, the FIRB will assess the investment to ensure that it's not contrary to Australia's national interests. And this national interest test includes consideration of the impact of a foreign investment proposal on Australian tax revenues. And in determining this, the ATO is often asked to provide a risk rating to FIRB. Accordingly, what that means is that the ATO is actually a very important and key stakeholder in the FIRB approval process. And certainly what we've seen from a tax controversy, and no doubt from an international tax perspective over recent years, is that the ATO's role has become more pronounced in terms of the interaction between the ATO and the FIRB approval process. And in fact, often the FIRB approval process is the very first point of ATO engagement when they review a transaction. And as such, from our perspective, it's really important that foreign investors review the FIRB application from a tax perspective to ensure that the ATO is appraised of all of the material facts and the supporting evidence that's collated. So in a way, the FIRB process is well before the ATO even conducts a review or an audit of a transaction from a tax perspective. What should investors expect to see? I think they should expect to receive detailed questions from FIRB regarding the matters that they propose, and that will focus on debt equity structures for the investment, for example. Most FIRB investments will then be made subject to a standard tax condition, including the annual tax report. And to the extent that the ATO's questions are not able to be completely answered in respect of in that time frame for the FIRB application, investors should also expect perhaps additional conditions requiring that information be provided within 90 days of the transaction completing. So a lot there for taxpayers and investors to think about.
That's really interesting, Angelina, because that's not very common in many other countries around the world. And so is there a potential, if someone is structuring their investment into Australia in a way that perhaps is not likely to be well received, could that in fact perhaps delay FIRB approval?
Absolutely, and that just demonstrates that the ATO is a very important stakeholder in the FIRB approval process, and that sort of aligns to my message that I say to all of my clients, the earlier you prepare in respect of the evidence, the better. So if you're going through that FIRB process from a tax perspective, you ought to be prepared in respect of the material facts and the evidence that you're going to be presenting to the FIRB, because there's no doubt that the ATO will have some level of influence over that.
And picking up my experience with a number of our inbound clients, it's very similar to what Angela said and Peter earlier. They're often taken aback by how much information is requested and the breadth of those queries. So as Angela mentioned, there's questions around the debt equity structure. They'll often ask whether or not some of the taxpayer alerts the ATO puts out that sort of specify particular arrangements they don't like the look of, or they want to investigate further. Are they being contemplated as part of the investment criteria, as well as, say, hybrid mismatch considerations? So to Angelina's point, it's very much important that you have a well sort of rounded and marshaled set of facts and background, because those questions do get asked very early on.
Oh, it really starts early on in the process. And what are some of the areas you have seen the ATO focus on recently as they're looking at multinational groups?
Sure. So look, certainly in our experience in respect of the number of reviews and audits we have put on at the moment, The ATO will be focusing on multinationals paying, quote, their fair share of tax. They'll focus on governance. They'll focus on justified trust. Denis will have seen that hybrids is now a focus area. International related party dealings such as intangibles, financing arrangements, embedded royalties, structured arrangements will continue. The other issue that is commonly coming up are capital revenue and losses. The ATO are also known for a number of practical compliance guidance documents, and that sets out the various areas of focus, their areas of concerns, and their expectations of taxpayers before they do come knocking. We're helping a lot of our clients actually in respect of these focus areas prepare and navigate their way through the ATO's PCGs. These PCGs are the ATO's view, but how can we help our clients make sure that they've got their documents and evidence ready in line with those PCGs? And if they're not in line with those PCGs, that's okay. We just need to explain to the ATO why our clients ought to be in the green zone rather than the red zone.
Got it. Well, just fascinating. So you're painting a picture of a very well-funded tax authority who's on a mission to raise a stated amount of revenue. So everyone needs to be prepared for the when, not if. And also to bear in mind that fresh investment into the country is also subject to tax scrutiny right from the get-go. So a very serious picture, all pointing to get your facts sorted and organised before you need to have them ready. So, gosh, folk, Peter, Angelina and Denis, thank you for your time. That is a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.